Having dedicated over a decade to nursing and nearly 2 decades to healthcare, both as a nurse and a narrator of eerie tales, I'm frequently asked about paranormal encounters. Truthfully, I have had such experiences. I used to narrate these events as if they were someone else's, but they were, in fact, my own. In this video, I'll recount my personal experiences from my nearly 20 years in healthcare. I recall my early days as a certified nursing assistant at a nursing home. A senior CNA was mentoring me during the day shift before I moved to nights. Around 4 weeks into my daytime training, an 84-year-old gentleman passed away. His family was en route from out of state. The female CNA had already cleaned the deceased patient and dressed him in a fresh gown, but he needed a shave. As the only male on duty that day, I was asked to perform this task. Shaving a deceased patient was unexpected and shocking. I remember entering the room alone after everyone else had finished, feeling profoundly uneasy as it was my first close encounter with a deceased body. I even doubted if healthcare was my calling. Nevertheless, within 5 minutes, I managed a decent shave and left, feeling a part of my soul was lost to fear. After completing my day shift training, I was alone on the night shift. Night shifts are standard for beginners due to their slower pace. This 140-bed nursing facility had a large storage room for damaged beds and wheelchairs, where night staff sometimes rested. New to both the facility and night shifts, I often felt drowsy between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. during breaks. I would eat and then nap in that storage room. One night, around 3 a.m., I clocked out for lunch and headed to the storage room. The door was ajar, suggesting someone was already inside, but the first bed was unoccupied. I entered the dimly lit room without switching on the lights, so as not to disturb the person on the other bed, which was behind a curtain. Upon entering, the person on the adjacent bed asked me to shut the door. I complied, closing it gently. About 10 minutes into my nap, the door flung open and the lights came on. Awakened, I groggily saw 2 men from the morgue enter with a metal gurney. They apologized for disturbing me and went behind the curtain. I then heard them count. 1, 2, 3, followed by the sound of a heavy object being placed on their gurney. They emerged with a body bag on the gurney. Before leaving, one asked if I wanted the light off, which I declined. This made me question if the person behind the curtain had been a recently deceased patient. I peeked behind it, but found no one. Frightened, I left. After that, I avoided napping during night shifts. I later discovered that a patient in another wing had died earlier, and the staff had placed the body in the room where I napped. It was routine to clean and move the body to the storage room for the morgue transporters. After some time, I became more cautious, particularly during night shifts. Upon becoming a registered nurse, I started working on the hospital's telemetry floor. A patient in his 90s was admitted for bradycardic episodes causing blackouts. The doctor found that his medication was causing his heart rate to drop dangerously low. After stabilizing him over a few days, the doctor planned his discharge. While assisting him in getting dressed, he turned pale, and his heart rate plummeted, initiating a code blue. An EKG technician present in the room also looked pale. I inquired about her well-being, and she mentioned seeing the same patient in the elevator on her way up. She questioned if the patient we were currently coding and the one in the elevator were the same. Her appearance and words sent chills down my spine. Despite our efforts, the patient died in the intensive care unit, ICU. Later, I transferred to the ICU, where room 14 was notorious for being spiritually troubled, or what we termed bad juju. Patients placed there often faced unforeseen complications, irrespective of their initial condition. One night, a critically ill patient was admitted to room 14. His condition worsened swiftly, and despite our interventions, he suffered cardiac arrest. Amidst the code blue chaos, I observed what seemed like a shadowy leg lowering from the ceiling vent, then retracting. I dismissed it as fatigue-induced hallucination, common at 3 a.m. However, a tap on my shoulder made me turn. The house supervisor asked, "You saw that too?" Confirming his observation, I felt deeply unsettled. Fortunately, the patient's family opted to halt resuscitation, letting him pass away peacefully. During the 2020 lockdown, a critically ill patient's family, barred from entering the hospital, provided traditional funeral attire for their loved one. sharing the same ethnicity and culture as the patient. I helped my colleagues dress her in these garments before she died. A week later, an elderly relative from my circle was admitted to our unit. Though not my patient, I visited her to say hello. The next night, my coworker asked me to translate for her, so I returned to the grandma's room. After translating, my coworker left a chart at the nurse's station. I remained, chatting with the grandma, who said, "Son, the other night, a Hmong auntie came in saying her family couldn't visit, so you helped her get dressed. She wants to thank you." Although I considered the possibility of medication-induced confusion, her words chilled me. After years of night shifts, I switched to days. We had a young patient admitted for severe shortness of breath due to a weak heart, placed in room 18. Our hospital isn't renowned for cardiac care, so we often stabilize patients and transfer them. This young man was admitted, and our doctor sought to transfer him for a higher level of care. We stabilized him while our case manager arranged the transfer. Around 3 p.m., he was airlifted. The housekeeper then cleaned room 18. Around 5 p.m., my coworker Jerry and I were at the nurse's station when a flat line appeared on the monitor, originating from room 18. The room was empty, visible from our station, with no new patient. About 10 minutes later, our unit manager informed us that the transferred patient hadn't survived, dying en route. It was incredibly strange. I recall a day when I had a critically ill patient needing one-on-one care. In her late 70s, her liver and kidneys were failing, requiring numerous medications to sustain her. These were administered via IV, but her kidneys were non-functional, causing fluid buildup. She was becoming increasingly fluid overloaded. Typically, we'd remove excess fluid through dialysis, but her critically low blood pressure made this lethal. She was a full code, meaning all measures should be taken to save her life. Usually the doctor would discuss options with family, but she had a conservator, someone appointed to make medical decisions when she couldn't. However, it was the weekend, and the conservator was unreachable. On my first day with this patient, she was so ill I doubted she'd survive 2 hours of my shift. Yet she lasted the entire day, surprising even the nurse who had handed her over to me and returned for her night shift. While we nurses never wish death on our patients, in such cases we hope for a peaceful end rather than prolonged suffering. I left that night, expecting her not to survive until morning, but she was still alive the next day, comatose and on multiple medications, yet clinging to life. Her circulation was so poor that her fingers and toes were blue and black. I'm not religious, but I silently prayed, "If there's a God, please take her." Caring for her was manageable as my sole patient, but witnessing her suffering was unbearable. I wondered if she was waiting for someone. On my third day, she was still alive. After receiving the report, I went to fetch a marker. Returning, I opened the door, my eyes on the comatose patient. Then I noticed someone standing by the wall on my right. I turned to see a boy, about 14, with blonde hair, around 5, 4, wearing a black and gold checkered shirt. He smiled slightly, then sidestepped behind an unused ventilator and sat down. I looked, but he was gone. I instantly knew my patient would likely pass that day. Around 11 a.m., her heart stopped. We attempted resuscitation for 20 minutes, but given her condition, the doctor soon called it off. In my nearly 20 years in healthcare, I've encountered many strange occurrences, but this experience solidified my belief in ghosts and spirits, and perhaps an afterlife. I still ponder who that boy was, perhaps a grandson or a long-deceased son. I don't know, but I'm relieved she's no longer suffering. Thank you for listening to my stories. Have a wonderful day or night.